All right, coming to you live on tape from the beautiful studios in Maryfield, Virginia, steps away from the multiplex where I believe those blankety-blank snakes are on that blankety-blank plane. It's the Fairfax Sports Report. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the show. We have an original episode now. Promise we're going to keep the Scotty Reynolds talk to a minimum. I'm sure you're all a little tired of that, but yeah, welcome back. We are about a week and a half away from primetime football discussion. We're going to probably hit on a little Redskin NFL talk tonight, but the gist of the show is going to be something you guys are going to love. It's all about sports history. It's about the greatest players, athletes of all time in the northern region. It's a show that you really don't want to miss here in the Fairfax Sports Report. My name is Greg Wyszynski, by the way. I'm with the Connection Newspapers. This is BJ Kubaroulas of the Connection Newspapers, Mirza Kurslovich of the Connection Newspapers, and of course Paul Frummelt of the Connection Newspapers. And how was your summer so far, boys?
I would love to say that we actually had a summer, Greg, but we didn't. Actually, what we did was we had a complete summer action-packed where we really went full throttle. We were talking to all the coaches out there who I'm sure know of this project and were a big help in putting this project together, which was basically the top 100 athletes, as you did mention. And what we did was, to put this project together, we ranked top 10 players in each of our communities that we do report on as a newspaper. We have about 16 newspapers, and we took a top 10 out of 10 of those newspapers. And so when you say it's a top 100 for the northern region, we did leave some schools out. I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit, but top 10, each of us wrote nearly 30 features this summer, so it was tracking down a bunch of old school athletes and coaches and whatnot. So you call it a summer, I call it just keep on trucking.
It was like you're in a prison camp. Well, before we get to the list, I want to thank the folks that make the show possible every time we do it. We are, of course, talking about the underwriters. Folks like CCI Screen Printing for all of your screen printing needs, 703-978-0257. And Quality Care Ford Service Center, servicing all makes and models, 703-383-6299. And say, what a summer it's been for Glow Pucks and 10 Cent Beer, the 101 worst ideas in sports history by yours truly. Available wherever books are sold. You know, the Quality Care Ford Service thing reminded me of how my battery died today, and I'm still very ticked off about that. I'm hoping that the fiery debate of the show doesn't even stoke my anger even more, because to be honest with you, BJ, I've been stunned by the amount of feedback, both positive and negative. Negative not in the sense that it wasn't a good project.
Right.
Negative in the sense that, A, you guys left X off this list. Did you think, honestly, when the greatest of all time project began, that you'd get the kind of reaction you've gotten?
You know, when we first started hashing out what we were going to accomplish this summer, we all sat down together and tried to figure out how we could really attack this thing to make sure that it was something that we didn't leave anybody out. And the more we thought about it, and the more we thought about how you don't leave somebody out, the project itself started to get a little bit, I'd say, taken off track. So what we had to do was then kind of box out a little bit and say, look, it's only 100, and we really could have done 500 athletes from this area. Just the Springfield, Fairfax, that area, Burke, that area could have been the top 50 of this list. They do have such a storied history and past over there. So what we did was we just went back and took 10 from each community and just battled through it, ranked them to the best of our ability. We'll talk a little bit more about how we did rank them, but really what we did in getting that feedback was now we're going to try to track down a couple more people and see if we can't report on some people that we missed. It's not a perfect science. It's not a perfect project. We wrote about it in our final edition that came out last week that this was an impossible project. It was an impossible undertaking. What we wanted to do was just highlight some of the greatest athletes ever to come out and just really start the discussions throughout the region and get people talking about really the historic past that this region has athletically. I mean, it's really incredible when you think about all the talent that has come out of this area.
Oh yeah, and we should mention right now that the entire project is available on connectionnewspapers.com.
Correct.
To be honest with you, the one thing that I think people probably didn't realize when they saw the beginning of this project is it's not only one of these great lists that you can look at and break down and argue about and who should be number 1 versus who should be number 2 versus who should be number 3 versus who should be number 99.
Right.
But the quality of the writing, and not to completely toot our own horn, but I mean, you guys did an amazing job, not only getting some of these folks on the horn who, quite frankly, fell off the face of the earth after their college careers in a lot of cases, but also really kind of finding some stories that had been buried through time. I mean, years pass, and all of a sudden you think about the stuff that was written even in like '92 that's now ancient history when you compare everything that's happened in even the last 6 years. Finding those stories again, rediscovering those athletes, telling some tales that haven't been told in quite a while, I think it made this an incredibly intriguing project, and one that I think was really successful in really capturing not only the greatness of the athletes, but their humanity as well.
Absolutely, and these guys over here, I mean, the same thing. We all wrote as many as we could and tracked down as many people as we could. Interesting, Mirza was really good at finding old stories in our old, archives and really going back and bringing those back to life to the forefront. He found some really interesting stuff.
I mean, it was a lot of work. It was hard work, but going back to those archives, man, it was a lot of fun too. Just looking at the old pictures and looking at some of the old writing, how people wrote back then about football, about baseball, basketball, and every sport that we covered really through this entire project, through the history. It was great. It really was. I mean, it wasn't a summer, like you said. It wasn't a vacation by any means, but it was fun.
Yeah, that archive with the Connection newspapers. For those of you who don't know, how we do have an archive room there, and there's these giant bonded volumes of old newspapers. It's like this thick. It looks like something that should be in like the Library of Congress or something, and they go all the way up. And sometimes where you're looking for it is right here, and sometimes where you're looking for it is right there. And you know what? For all of the innovation at the Connection, a non-rickety ladder really not one of the things that they had in the budget. So it's a dangerous job, and by golly, you guys pulled it off.
And got to mention that, of course, Paul was, obviously did really well with getting some of these guys and tackling the tough stories as well. I know he did a story on Ricky Harris recently that was they had gone through some controversy in his life, and we'll get to that. But I guess, Paul, we had talked so much in the office about, the interesting stories these guys can tell you, and I know that you got a chance to talk to some really interesting people.
Well, the thing with that is, like Ricky Harris, is you read these press releases, so-and-so did this, something happened, you don't get the whole story, and that's by covering this person, by talking to him, his mother, his coaches, you get the full story. I got another person, Jeremy Ferry. This amazing high school wrestler, nothing, you hear nothing about him after high school.
Right.
You want to get that story too, and that's one thing this project did, is we could really flesh out these people and show them what they're doing now and why they've taken that path in life.
Well, there you go. Well, now that we've got the mutual shining out of the way, let's get right into the list. It is a heck of a list, and what we're going to do tonight is kind of break this list down, the 100 greatest of all time. We're going to break it down into 10 athlete segments and talk about it and debate a little bit and get it rolling. The first, of course, would be the first group here, 100 to 90. Or 91 rather, and you can see we've got a little bit of gymnastics in Sarah Spring. Atlee Hammaker at 99. That's a guy who made the bigs. That's a guy who made the major leagues right there. 99 on the list, just to kind of show you the level and the depth of talent that we're talking about here. And then of course back in '76 he comes through Mount Vernon High School. Anybody you guys want to speak about in this group here?
If I may just say that, you're mentioning Atlee Hammaker is making it, in the majors or what have you, but Alexandria has such a strong history, and I know BJ just touched on Burke, Fairfax, and Springfield as having a storied history in their high schools. Alexandria goes way back, and I mean, there are so many great athletes that came out of that area.
Right.
And I mean, just like you said, number 99 probably deserves to be higher up in some ways, but as far as the project goes.
What's interesting, you mentioned the Mount Vernon thing and the Alexandria thing. I mean, what's interesting, if you look back at the entirety of this list, you can clearly see for some of these schools there are clusters of years where they were the dominant force in a lot of different athletics. You see the Billy Davis at 91, Atlee Hammaker 99. I mean, that's a 4-year spread between those two. I mean, that's right in Mount Vernon's wheelhouse as being a real Northern Region power. You're talking back in football and stuff too.
And what we'll find as we go through this list is people will probably say, how the heck is this guy ranked above this guy? Well, let's touch on it real quick on how we did go about doing these rankings. And they are open in interpretation. Like we said before, these are our rankings for our coverage, but and we'll get back to the list. But how we did this was basically you get 10 from each area, and they basically battle against each other as well as other lists.
Right.
So, for example, if there's a guy that was from say a Woodson that didn't get on the list, that was an incredible athlete, but maybe you see somebody from McLean that you think, well, this guy was a better football player than this guy. How did he get on the list? He wasn't necessarily competing against that guy just to break into his own top 10.
Right.
We then reshuffled just to get everybody geographically represented and all the schools on there, because some schools aren't as great as others, but they don't have a historic past as others, but they do deserve to have some of their best athletes out there. Another thing that we do have to touch on, though, is that we did not include Jeb Stewart, Falls Church, Annandale, and Thomas Jefferson into this poll, just because those are four schools that fall outside of our coverage. Again, this is the Connection newspaper's top 100 athletes of all time, so it's from our coverage throughout the years.
Right, and I would encourage the South County fans to keep watching, even though I'm pretty sure no Stallions made the list. But
Close, though, close.
Well, and just to clarify, you take our paper, the Centerview.
Right.
So you've got the Westfield kids versus the Centerville kids versus the Chantilly kids, and they're ranked like that. And then you take that ranking,
right,
and then you throw it against everybody else in the region, and that's kind of how the mix comes about.
Exactly. You had to be top 10 in your area to break into the top 100, and a lot of people got left off because of that. We could have done 50 out of, like I said, the Burke, Springfield, Fairfax area, but just wouldn't have been geographically fair to the other schools.
So it's slightly less complicated than the BCS, but only slightly.
And almost as flawed, Greg. All right. So one guy I saw up on that first top 10 that we did throw up there, one guy that I definitely thought that we should absolutely speak about is Chris Sabo, number 93 out of Herndon High School in 1993. Actually is in Florida now, in Atlanta, actually splits times between those two areas. Runs restaurants, but back in his time, he was an incredible wrestler at Herndon High School. He went on to win 3 state titles, was the first to do that at Herndon High School, was the first state title winner at Herndon High School. So really an incredible athlete. His father had a very big impact on his wrestling career, as did Coach Carl Spinnenweber. I got a quote from the coach at Chantilly High School, who was very involved still in those times, and what he said was, look, Herndon ran the streets back in those days as far as wrestling, and Sabo was a big part of establishing that legacy there at Herndon. They'd like to see that pick back up now as they're looking for a new wrestling coach.
There you go. All right, let's take a look at the next segment of athletes in the 100 greatest of all time, 90 to 81. And right here, I think, folks, you get a good sense of just how difficult this task is. You look at some of the names on this list. First of all, you're comparing a guy from 1966 against somebody from 2006, and they're only a couple spots away from each other. But more importantly, you look at number 83 on this list, and also number 81 on this list. 83 is Jasmine Thomas, someone who hasn't even gone to college yet, but clearly is, without a doubt, one of the greatest high school girls basketball players we're ever going to see come through the northern region. Then you look at someone like John Crone from Yorktown. Crone's a guy who goes off to college. I mean, personally, I don't know how well he's done, how well he hasn't done in college, but there's no question that in high school, he's one of the most complete total package athletes to ever come through Yorktown, which is a school with a lot of history. So how do you compare apples and oranges like that? It's a very tough task, yet I think when you look at the list in its entirety, I think it's been done pretty well.
It's tough, and guys, it's something that we struggle with in explaining to people. I'll put you on the spot, Paul, when they asked you, and you always had a good answer. When somebody would ask you, how did you do this? How did you rank me at this number? You always had a pretty good answer at that.
Well, especially my number 67, where we see coming up, I said, hi, I'm Paul Front with the Connection newspapers. I'd like to do a profile. We're doing the top 100. Immediately, what number am I?
Right.
I said, 67. 67? What? And I was like, 67 is pretty good. We got people, back in the 60s. We're going, 40 plus years of history, and 67 is pretty darn good. Even to be on the 100, be top 100 is pretty spectacular. So I tell them that, it's a pretty good deal. It's a pretty good number right there.
And Mirza also as well. I mean, people ask, was it just what they did in high school? Was it just what they did in college? Was it pro? And it's a tricky answer.
You know what? I mean, looking back at that list of those next top 10 that we had on there from 90 to 81, I'm looking at John Curtis, the wrestler from Fairfax. At Fairfax High School, he didn't really accomplish that much. You can see him there, number 86. He didn't accomplish that much as a high school wrestler, but he went on to college and became, a great NCAA wrestler. And after that, he had a great pro career. I mean, he did a lot of things after high school. And, some of these guys, great athletes in high school, like you were saying, some of them went on to do greater things later on. It was hard to, like you said, apples and oranges. How do you mix them? How do you compare them?
And then I'd look at two people on that list that I had the pleasure of covering, and Abe Thompson is a guy who who was probably the best individual high school soccer player on the male side that I ever saw play at this level. But you compare what he's done after high school versus what someone like Brian Carroll's done after high school, and there's no comparison. And then Lindsay Erder, she's a very good example of an athlete who, on her own, and as an individual, was a star swimmer. But you also have to take into account the fact that she was on arguably the most dominant swimming team for a good stretch of years in the northern region and perhaps even in the state in Langley. So she's got a lot of gold that she won individually, but she's also got even more gold that she won as part of an amazing relay team.
If I have my numbers correct, Erder won 6 state titles in high school individually, and that's a very big accomplishment. Also still holds many records from some of the local pools that she swam with, including Curl Burke and many others growing up in Great Falls. Recently she was, or not recently, at an early age from 12 and 13, she was in the Olympic trials. So this was a girl that showed a lot of promise and helped establish that dominance at Langley. I do want to mention Jasmine Thomas at number 83. We touched on it. She is the only current Northern Region athlete that is on the top 100 list, and it's because she's accomplished so much at Oakton High School. She's set to become the all-time, well, she's already the all-time leading girls scorer in history and boys scorer in basketball history at Oakton High School. She's most likely going to break many scoring records to come this year. Still has her senior year left ahead of her, and has a top 5 now of colleges that she's looking at, many ACC schools, including UVA and Duke and Maryland. So we'll keep an eye on Jasmine as she develops through her final year here.
There you go. Let's keep it rolling. Let's get to the next segment there, 80 to 71. Now, there are some instances where you have to kind of do the dual entry thing, like you're at the track and there's the 1 and the 1A. Any reason why these two guys are grouped at 77?
Well, Randy Dodson and Brandon Richardson really helped create the Herndon basketball program to what we know it to be now. If you talk to Coach Gary Hall over there, he's going to be going into his 18th year now, just won his first regional title and went to the state tournament this past year. But you talk to him and he says, obviously Scotty Reynolds is the greatest he's ever coached, but those two are the most influential that he's ever coached on that program. I mean, they used to grab bricks during practice and run sprints with them, and they helped create that sort of work ethic in practice. And some of those guys, Dodson right there held the record for scoring until Scotty just broke it this year. Richardson was a big man in the middle, the only Herndon basketball player ever to graduate with 1,000 points and over 500 rebounds. So definitely helped establish that program. I do want to talk a little bit about Norris Davis on there. Norris Davis went on to become a great defensive back at UNC, but led South Lakes to an incredible run under Tom Sekul's over there as the football program. He was a baseball player. Did so much for that school. Really was just an incredible athlete.
And then want to also point out, you look at that list, this is a good time to bring up the fact that not only are you comparing athletes from different eras, from different schools, some schools that don't even exist anymore, but you're also comparing sport against sport. And you look at that list right there, you've got a couple of softball players, Marin Grimm, you've got soccer, you've got baseball, you've got basketball, I mean, you've got football in there as well. It's a tough juggling job, isn't it, to try to compare apples and oranges a little bit?
I'd say so, especially, I mean, you're looking at, like you said, different sports. You're just naming the main sports that these people have played. But, I mean, there's a lot of people on this list that are multiple sports athletes that have played, 3 sports in high school for all 12 seasons, maybe 2 sports or what have you. But they've either excelled at all 3 or maybe at one more so than the others. But, we had to choose which one was their best sport, and that was also another tough thing to choose.
Sure. All right, let's take a look at the next segment of athletes on the 100 greatest of all time, greatest Northern Region athletes in the Connection newspapers. All right, this is an interesting group here, and Paul, your number 67, of course, is previously mentioned in an interesting story. Tell us a little about Eddie Royal.
Well, the thing about Eddie Royal is he's still at Virginia Tech. He's doing a great job there, and he was instrumental with that Westfield team that won the state championship. And you're still seeing Eddie bloom. He still has a great future in football. So, like I told him when he said 67, I said, Eddie, you still got a ways to go. So, you still have this future. Your road is not done. So we expect to see some good things from Eddie still in the future.
You got Marshy Smith on there, who was an outstanding swimmer at Woodson, and then an interesting one right above her at number 62 on the top 100, Mary Yarrison of Lee. I mean, going back to that old apples and oranges argument we just had before, I mean, that's a diver right there. As far as I know, she didn't play another sport in high school. Maybe for a cup of coffee when she was a freshman or a sophomore. But that's a diver going up against the best in basketball, the best in football, and for her to be on this list must be a tribute to how good she truly was at her skill as a diver swimmer in high school.
Go ahead.
I mean, the girl won 4 state titles in her 4 years of diving. She has the perfect record. The only meets she didn't win is when she didn't compete in them for whatever injury. Unbelievable athlete, and still is in college.
To think about these individual sports, the track and the swimming and diving and or tennis or golf, stuff like that is, football, baseball, softball, they get the headlines, that everybody, they have to have all the statistics. But if these people that made the list from diving or swimming or track, they were just so unbelievable. You cannot ignore people like that, and that's why they're here.
And one story I definitely want to bring up that I read that was just incredibly interesting. Number 68 there, Mirza went and met with some of the Hayfield folks and talked about the Felton brothers, and Mirza, definitely a story that impacted you as well.
Impacted me. I think it impacted everybody who could have read it, not because of my writing, but because of the story. Because of, Ronell and Cornell Felton. Those are 2 brothers that didn't play together at Hayfield. They just missed each other by a year. Ronell graduated in '94, Cornell graduated in '98. But I mean, those 2 have the legacy at Hayfield, that basketball players today relate back to them. And you don't see that much in high school sports, at least I don't think so, where people look back to the history and they remember the names, they know what the names stand for in that program.
There you go.
And Ronell, actually, lost a battle, I believe, with
Cancer.
with cancer, and that was, also something that you wrote about that was probably something difficult to write about. But don't you think it also helped immortalize him a little bit at that school?
It did. I mean, his numbers spoke for themselves in a way, and his post-high school career took him up to Niagara College in New York, and he did really, really well there his first 2 years, but unfortunately he got ill. He came back, but instead of just falling back into his illness, he came back and he started coaching Hayfield, and he gave his younger brother a lot of input and insight on how to play high school basketball, and they went on to do great things, in the region and in the state tournament. So, I mean, really an unbelievable story there.
Oh, yeah.
Am I correct in saying that they were both regional players of the year?
I believe Cornell was. I'm not sure about Ronell, but they were both very highly regarded in the region. Every coach I talked to had the best things to say about them.
There you go, absolutely. Let's take a look at the next grouping here on the big list. And I believe we were looking, 60 to 51 on the top 100 greatest of all time athletes. Irmer's an interesting choice at 60. I mean, that's a great kid. I don't know if I would have had him that high necessarily if I was ranking him in Alexandria. But now you're starting to see some familiar names to people that if you're just a casual fan of the Northern Region. I mean, Val Brown, was a star at Lee, went on to, I think, lead the country in scoring in college, wasn't he? Or
he missed it by 0.2 points per
0.2
game.
points, unbelievable.
As a freshman.
There you go. Scott Seekules, of course, was a pro, and so on and so forth. Anybody on the list you want to pick off here?
I definitely would like to talk a little bit about Kashansky, but before we get there, I got to talk about Michael Jackson from South Lakes, number 55. Probably could have moved him higher. Was obviously an NBA draft pick after winning a national title at Georgetown. Basketball along with Ewing and those boys, and just an incredible athlete at South Lakes. Was actually Grant Hill's hero. Grant Hill wanted to be Michael Jackson before he got to high school, and speaking with Grant, he mentioned that Jackson was very close with his family, actually interned with Hill's mother, Janet, on Capitol Hill, and Calvin Hill, Grant's father, actually, funny story, all the basketball players were hanging out at his house one day with Grant as young kids, because they were great players from the time they were very early, and they said they wanted to be like Michael Jackson, and we're talking about Michael Jackson the whole time. Calvin's thinking they're talking about the singer. So I thought that was pretty funny. But
Let's go on to Kashansky right now, and he's another one of those players. He's still a stud over at Double A Tulsa Drillers for the Rockies, minor affiliate for the Rockies. He was a stud pitcher at Chantilly. They moved him over to first base, and now he's a power hitter. He's smacking home runs like you wouldn't believe. He went to the XM Satellite Radio Futures game, which was played during the All-Star game on the same weekend, and he hit a home run in that. And but as a pitcher, what I focused on for the story for as a pitcher for Chantilly, I mean, look at these ERAs: 0.93, 1.03, 2.21. I mean, those are some ERAs right there. He was pretty much unhittable during his time at Chantilly.
Yeah, that's what makes it so crazy that he's not. I mean, that he could maybe make the show with his bat versus with his arm. Because anyone who saw him pitch in high school, boy, that's one of those special pitchers. You know what I mean? That's amazing to think.
Well, that's one thing when you go for that is he was. I mean, his pitching was what got him noticed, but his hitting was just as good. Let's go. You know, in the same time for .438 batting average, .447. I mean, he was still doing a great job there.
There you go.
You talk about some major leaguers, and just want to point out two guys up there right now that played professional in their own sports. Willie Pyle, currently with the Dallas Cowboys, and then there's Mike Wallace, who graduated in '69 and helped Madison win their first state title in '68. Was actually in 2 state title games, and told me he got lucky in the win and got unlucky in the loss. And just a great guy. Went on to play for the New York Yankees as well, and spent some time in professional baseball. So.
And really had a terrific interview with the president of Iran the other day. Oh, that was the other Mike Wallace, wasn't it? Sorry.
I will go on Scott Sekiels just real quick. I mean, Sekiels, great quarterback at Chantilly, graduated in '83. What's interesting about him, went to the NFL, didn't have the best career, but he had a decent career. But look at the coaches he was coached by: Tom Landry, Don Shula, Bill Parcells.
Wow.
Those are some of the coaches that Scott Sekiels got to learn football from.
That's amazing.
That is amazing.
All right, let's check out the next segment as we cross over the halfway mark of the 100 greatest of all time. Now you're starting to see some familiar names. If you've been a fan of Northern Region sports for the last 20 years, now you're seeing some names, folks. Ashley McCulloch, who could win a state title just by walking through the hallways of W.T. Woodson. Then Brandon Snyder, of course. Brandon Royster was a guy, Paul, that you obviously know a little bit from your playing days at Fairfax. Talk a little bit about some of the Fairfax representation in this segment.
Well, there's not much, but I'm glad Royster is on there. I actually did get a chance to play with Royster. I got to block for Royster, and I was talking to defensive lineman Chris Ward, who graduated with Royster. Great defensive lineman, offensive lineman, great wrestler actually too. And he told me the quote he said just made perfect sense. I agree with it 100%. He said, Royster made everybody look better. And that just it makes perfect sense. Royster was, I mean, if you missed a block, Royster would juke the guy and not get tackled. And, you know, you'd look good for it because, you know, he's going 20 yards. And also just a great, great guy. Quiet guy on the field, but he led with his athleticism. He led with just this presence of, you know, we're going to win. We're going to do something great here. So, I mean, great guy.
And looking back at that list, you know, it's amazing to think how many folks come through this area and actually do make it to the show. I mean, Keith Lyle, Pulsifer, Eugene Chung. I mean, it's humbling to think that in the 50 to 41 segment, you've got pros. Guys that were stars in high school, stars in college, stars in pros, yet compared to the rest of the talent coming through this region, they're above 41 on this list.
Eugene Chung's a classic example of why this list could appear flawed to other people who don't understand the way we did our criteria. Chung did not do a whole lot with Oakton football. I mean, they won 1 game in his junior year. His senior year, they went on to do to really turn that around. I believe they went 9-1-1, if I'm correct. But Chung was one of those guys that was just a slave to the weight room and was always in there. Had one of his parents died early on when he was a young kid, and just kind of was this introverted, quiet guy that just really went out there and eventually built himself into a player that went on to Virginia Tech and really helped in the infancy of that program, and played in the NFL as well. So he's one of those guys that maybe didn't have a great high school career, but went on to do great things at the collegiate and pro level.
I want to talk a little about Brandon Snyder. We just talked about Krashansky. Now, Snyder's one of those people that even when you stay in the Northern Region, gets drafted first round by the Orioles. We're thinking great things for Brandon. When I talked to him a couple months ago, he was struggling a little bit at short season single A, and unfortunately he re-hurt his shoulder, and it looks like he's going to be healing for a good long time. But a quote I heard was he's still young, he still has time, and he has a lot of potential. And especially for Orioles fans like me, let's hope he fulfills that potential, because he's a great guy, great player. So I mean, hopefully injuries won't plague his career.
And hopefully a local kid that can bring some of those thousands that refuse to make the drive to Camden Yards anymore back to the stadium, right?
I would love somebody to bring the fans, because no one seems to like Tejada anymore. But let's talk about happier times.
There you go. Happier times. Let's look at the next segment of this wonderful and intense list. Intense in the sense that there is debate to be had. Now, before we get to the debate, let's talk about the fact that this is a great representation of why the Northern region, even though other parts of the state like to have their fun and bemoan the fact that everybody thinks the Northern region's football is overrated at times, look at that list. Look at the people on that list that went on to bigger and better things and also were complete stars playing in high school here. I mean, Emo's a star, Boone's a star. Baoju was legendary when he played in high school around here.
Sorensen went from being a quarterback at Marshall High School, to Virginia Tech, and he was then transferred over to the defensive side of the ball. Wasn't too happy about it. This is a guy that weighed in at $120, just over 5 feet, his first day of freshman football at Marshall. Also one of those weight room guys that was doing the off-season stuff before it was real popular nowadays with all the money to be had. But speaking of money to be had, he signed an extension with the Jaguars. He's a captain on special teams for them in the NFL. So that guy is a self-made guy with a dad that played at Miami, and we're praying for his dad right now, who's recently, I know, had some medical problems, so we're hoping that he's okay. But Mears has got a guy on there that I thought was really a special high school player in Damone Boone.
Boone, let me tell you, I mean, I talked to a whole lot of coaches for this project. I got a lot of quotes, but Boone got the most of them and the best of them. I mean, this guy was unbelievable in high school. He went on to the University of Maryland, and things didn't happen for him there, and he had some family issues. He came back home. He sorted those out. He went a few years later. He goes on to Carson Newman, and a Division II powerhouse, and does it all over again and becomes a stud athlete over there. I mean, just an incredible guy. And I mean, some of the quotes that I got about Damone Boone are unbelievable.
Let's take a look at that list real quick again, because obviously one thing that people might have a little bone to pick is the fact that Scotty Reynolds is number 31 on this list. We're all Scotty Reynolds fans. We all love the kid. We all think he had a fantastic high school career. But isn't this kind of like putting Shaq on the top 50 of all time before he really did anything?
Well, I can't, oh boy, I can't think that, I don't think you can say that Scotty Reynolds didn't do anything. The kid was the 3-time Northern Region Player of the Year. He was this year's State Player of the Year. He's, I believe, number 16 all-time in scoring in Virginia. Could possibly even be higher than that if my numbers aren't correct. But Scotty was a special player. In fact, I think some people would argue that he should be higher on the list. He's the highest, well, second highest player on this list from Herndon High School, and could probably have climbed a bit higher. Incredible basketball player, was the first McDonald's All-American since number 43 on this list, a South Lakes kid, Joey Beard, who's playing professionally right now over in Italy, actually for the team where the number 1 draft pick came from this year in the NBA. I just thought that was a quick little 7 degrees there. But back to Scotty Reynolds. I mean, the kid, he's at Villanova now. He's training to get himself onto the court and hopefully get some playing time. But you cannot deny what he did at the high school level. And if we're going to put Jasmine Thomas on there, and she hasn't even graduated yet and hasn't been to the state, state title game and that sort of thing, you got to have Scotty Reynolds on there.
Yeah, but Jasmine Thomas was number 83. Scotty's number 31. Scotty's ranked ahead of guys that were stars in high school, stars in college.
And there's no perfect science to this. I mean, this is we're taking a gamble here, I guess you would say, on knowing what type of player he is, was, and will be, and the work ethic that he has to put himself in a situation to play professional ball and follow his dream and be the player that he wants to be at the pro level. Allen Iverson is his favorite player. I can't quite go there and say he's that type of player, but I think that's what he wants. And short of a state title this year, he's pretty much gotten everything he's wanted. He got that regional title this year that he promised to Coach Hall from an early time on, and I think he's a special player that definitely deserves, if not to be higher, to definitely be on the list.
Now, all that devil's advocate stuff aside, I mean, like you said, 10 years from now, we might be looking back at this and saying he was too low. He could easily be top 3 in 10 years. So the potential's there.
Absolutely.
Let's take a look at the next segment. This is a very, very interesting grouping of athletes. And BJ, my good man, you came up with a pretty remarkable story out of this group, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, Jay Franklin, number 25 from Madison, ranked right there at number 25. Jay Franklin, 1971, was part of 2 state title teams at Madison High School, I got a chance to sit down with Jay Franklin, and he was drafted number 2 overall Major League Baseball in 1971. He was only 18 years old when he made it up to the show. Gave up 4 home runs in a stretch of 4 days. Actually gave up number 638 to Hank Aaron. Was drafted by Jay was drafted by the Padres and brought on to play with his young friend, actually, from we saw also on this list was Clay Kirby. Franklin is actually struggling right now, folks, and if you read the story on connectionnewspapers.com, you'll see what he's been through. I'll give you a synopsis. Over the last 15 years, he's struggled with schizophrenia and depression, and he's a guy that currently lives on a cot in his mother's den in a 1-bedroom apartment once every other week. He also lives in an assisted living type facility in Reston. He's struggled with schizophrenia and depression. He's had alcoholism problems and gambling problems, and just is sometimes aware that he has mental issues, and sometimes he is not aware that he has those mental issues. And he tried to throw himself out of a 4-story window during a court-sanctioned health assessment in 1991, and that battle has just continued. He went through problems. His father, in about a 4-year period after he was burnt out of the game, really, he threw his arm out. The succession after that was he got married early. His wife then left him. His father committed suicide. Several things happened to put him over the edge. His wife then died eventually that had left him, and just never rebounded. Was one of those guys that a lot of people think it's just a baseball thing, that he didn't make it in the game and that he just fell apart after that. I think that has a lot to do with it. A lot of people will tell you that he has regrets about not being able to really look. Overall, you're number 2. This whole town back in those times in Vienna was a farming town, and he was the big guy, and he just didn't make it. Things fell apart after that. He struggled for 20 years with this problem, and definitely needs some help. He's really in bad shape.
And that's the thing about the list. I mean, we're talking about the humanity of some of these athletes before. I mean, you know, there is a lot of that sort of where are they now sort of fun. Who's selling restaurants? Who got fat? That kind of stuff. But at its core, there are so many stories in this project that speak to not only the pressures of sports and what happens when you lose it,
Right.
But also just the pressures of life. I mean, what happens to some of these people when things don't pan out, not only professionally, but personally, and things like that. I mean, it's a real harrowing look at the different paths that people can take through high school, through college, and then through their pro career. It's really startling to see the Franklin story all spelled out in front of you and the journey he's taken, you know?
And you mentioned college and that sort of thing. That's one of those things he did mention that he wished he had done. I mean, this guy signed a contract for $65,000 back in those days. That was a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know, back in that time, I think around between $16,000 and $20,000 was the league minimum. So he was actually a big gun, made it right up through the minor league system. Some think he threw too many innings before he got there, found a lump on his arm, and just that was it. He had thrown it out, and he had actually done it after, in the bigs, when he had given up a home run. He wanted to get the next guy out and just threw. I mean, this guy was throwing 98 miles an hour in high school, threw his arm out on the next pitch on the next batter, and that was it for him. Padres released him after a couple more tries to get back, and his life really is just falling apart, and they're hoping that he can get some help. So if you want to read that story on the connectionnewspapers.com, there's also ways to get in touch with that family.
And not every story on this list works out well. I mean, you know, Paul, you wrote about Ricky Harris. Now, Ricky Harris obviously didn't go through the trials and tribulations that Jay Franklin did.
Certainly not.
But there's no question that when that kid was in high school, he was one of the few hurdlers that I ever saw that put it to the kids in the South, that completely competed with every kid from Richmond, every kid from the beaches, and would win. And that's a remarkable thing for a Northern Region athlete to do. Yet when he went to college, I mean, he succeeded, but not necessarily at the level that people around here probably thought he would.
No, he definitely, I mean, when he was naming off the records, these state records, the national records that he broke as a freshman, sophomore in high school, I mean, the list went on, and I interrupted him at one point to talk, you know, to change the subject. He's like, I'm not done. Let's keep it going. I mean, definitely a character. Unfortunately, he was picking it back up in college. Still, as a freshman in college, still breaking those records, doing real well. He went pro, and last May 2005, he was actually suspended for 2 years by the United States Anti-Doping Agency for having a stimulant in his body. I mean, we see all these, you know, right now, especially track people getting suspended for prohibited drugs. It turns out that it was a dexedrine, which is a medication he takes for ADHD. He's been taking it since he's been in 4th grade. They've had the papers filed. It was well-known fact. These papers got misplaced. You know, you talk to different people about it, and you know, bottom line is they were misplaced. They decided that it wasn't his fault that he had that drug in it. You know, that he got suspended. They still gave him a year. He just recently got done with his suspension, and he's trying to get back. And he said he believes he's one of the top 3 runners in the nation. Now he just has to prove it.
Not really surprised that he said that.
Yeah,
but,
he's a character.
I've been covering him. But yeah, just fantastic stories. Moving on with the list here, let's take a look at the next flock of athletes. And again, we go from 20 down to 11. Andy Heck, big-time pro athlete from this area, no question about that. Ed Moses, championship swimmer. Anybody on this list kind of stick out for you guys?
I just want to touch upon Pat Toomey. Pat Toomey is a 1966 graduate of Edison High School. He was a 3-sport athlete and all-state in all 3 sports: baseball, basketball, football. He's best known for his football because he went on and had a 10-year NFL career in which he's won a Super Bowl. Then he was a member of an 0-14 Tampa Bay team in their inaugural year, and then he went back up to what he called the penthouse, and he was coached by John Madden in Oakland. The guy is really fun to talk to. And you said it was fun to find out what they do nowadays. Well, Pat Toomey lives in New Mexico, and he's interested in the abundance of Native American culture present in New Mexico. I mean, a great guy to talk to.
Absolutely. And Skeeter Swift, probably second to Bao Ju, is the greatest name on the list, I'd say. I don't know if anyone else has any personal favorites, but that would be mine.
I got to touch on Wes Suter there. Number 15, Wes Suter was a 1982 graduate of South Lakes High School and was a part of the original gymnastics team, boys gymnastics, which is now a defunct sport in the Virginia High School League. But Suter helped bring a state title to the South Lakes boys gymnastics team. It was the first for the school. He was a guy that was under Coach Bob Grauman, who went on to be an administrator and coach and whatnot throughout the region. But he said that Suter didn't want to be a part of the team, as gymnastics was such an individual sport back in those days. He had to kind of, I guess, break the stallion. You know what I mean? The kid was a guy that wanted to do his own thing, wanted to go to his own gym, but just compete with the team, not really practice. And by the end of his 4 years, he was helping kids along and really building a legacy there. They went on to win another 2 state titles, I believe. And Suter went on to win at every level. He was won 15 state titles in high school. 15 state titles in high school. Won the all-around in the 1985 NCAA as part of Nebraska. They did a very touching piece on NBC back in that time. His father passed away shortly thereafter. And then he was also an Olympian in 1988 in Seoul. So this was a guy that really just won at every level. I believe the Americans were 11th that year in gymnastics, but definitely just a guy that really was a pioneer for the sport of boys gymnastics in this area.
And which is now defunct.
Which is now defunct.
As Frummelt can tell you, that boys gymnastics, of course, the first state team championship in Fairfax High School.
What am I going to say? I'm proud of him.
Well, Paul's always been very good on the pommel horse.
Uneven bars, specialty.
There's a couple more guys on there we should probably mention if we could bring that one back up. I know Mirza had just an incredible time to speak with Ed Moses, I believe. I mean, that was a great story.
I mean, Ed Moses, the guy broke something like 5 world records, if I'm not mistaken, in 3 days in one competition in Germany. I mean, what more can you say about a person? He's an Olympic gold winner. But right now, the interesting thing is that Ed Moses is trying to get back to his original love, and that is golf. And he's trying to join the PGA Tour. I mean, first of all, the guy didn't even start doing swimming until his senior year of high school. That's when he started doing year-round swimming. And within 10 months, he exploded onto the scene and became nationally ranked. And all of his coaches that I talked to said, this doesn't happen in our sport. It was so much fun to watch somebody be so committed to a sport. And all of them are saying, yes, he's going to join the PGA Tour. He's going to be successful at golf because of his commitment to the sport, to what he does.
Boy, swimming the golf, I don't want to say there's a diminishing demand of athleticism in his career choices, but good Lord.
Got to mention Bob Brower up there before we move on to the top 10. I know you've all awaited the top 10, but Brower, Greg, this is a guy that was it was an all-region selection in 4 different sports. football, baseball, track. What did I say? Football, baseball, track, and basketball. Basketball was his love, but this is the guy that everybody remembers in Vienna. This is the guy. Everybody has the guy of their area. When you think of Vienna, you think of Bob Brower. The guy just went on to he went to Duke and played both baseball and football at Duke. Only played his senior year of football at Madison because the track coach basically made him. That's what they did back in those times. He used to go from the track to the baseball field and switch out of his uniforms to play on the same season. And just a guy that now, you mentioned all these stories of what people do now, he actually works with Scott Boras, which is a super agent.
Super agent Scott Boras.
$252 million contract for Alex Rodriguez. That was what the Boras company did, which is the biggest athletic contract ever signed in the United States' athletic history. So right there, that tells you he's the vice president of that company. He works with the Major League Baseball draft, and he certainly knows his Major League Baseball, having played some, also with the Yankees.
How much was that A-Rod contract?
$252 million.
What, to be the second best third baseman in New York?
I will not argue with you.
There we go.
All right, let's take a look at the top 10. I know everybody wants to get there, and here we are, folks. The top 10 greatest of all time.
Dun, dun, dun.
This is a really interesting selection, boys. I mean, to be honest with you, more people have made mention of the ranking of the top 4 on this list than anything else, I think, on the list. Before we get there, anybody 10 to 5 that you want to make mention of? The one guy I want to actually ask somebody about, Rob Muzio. Is that how you say his last name?
Yes, it is.
At number 7. Now, at first, you look at the rest of the names on that list, and they're pretty famous, and this guy, not so much. But in reading about him, there's no question that as a multi-sport athlete, this guy might be the best.
Yeah, let me tell you about Rob Muzio. First of all, we're doing the top 100 athletes of all time.
Yes.
The guy is a decathlete, which means he does 10 different things at the same time.
Wow.
And all of them are different, specialties. I talked to him about his training, and he's like, well, it's a full day of work because, he has to train technique, strength for 10 different things.
Wow.
The guy came in 5th at the Barcelona Olympics in 1992. He's also been what Coach Bob Digby over at Lake Braddock called the master of the bad break. Rob Muzio has gotten injured and, some really uncomfortable times for him right before the Olympics trials, right, before the World Championships. The guy is just an unbelievable athlete. He was also a great football player, and he attracted attention from programs such as Penn State and Notre Dame, and you can't say, much more about a football player than that.
Well, and I think you bring up an interesting point. For all of the accolades these people get, and you can count the championships and the blue ribbons and all that other nonsense, but to come back from a potentially career-ending injury, to come back from getting knocked on your behind at the peak of your athleticism, and then to come back and make something out of it. I mean, I think you have to take that into account. I mean, I really do, and I think that's why having him at 7 makes sense. Beyond the fact that from a purely athletic standpoint, the guy was gold. But to come back from what he came back from is just outstanding.
First of all, Rob Muzio, he set his personal record at the age of 30.
Wow.
So, I mean, this wasn't his prime time. He came back, he trained for it, and then he set his best. He grew up with severe asthma, something that he's, he's showing people you don't have to be stopped by whatever your condition is. Don't let your mind stop you. Let your body do what you can do. And that's the message he wants to send out. And like I said, an unbelievable athlete and a great person to talk to. He really, had a lot of insight into.
Let's toss up that list once again and take a look at the rest of the top 10. Let's tick them down 10 to 1 here. Hubert Davis, of course, a high school, college, NBA star.
Currently on ESPN now as an analyst.
Chris Warren, running back, formerly. I believe he's the leading rusher in Seahawks history, to be honest with you.
He is. He does hold that record. He's a 3-time Pro Bowler as well.
Tommy Amaker's moved on, I believe, into coaching now, is he, a little bit? Or?
He is. He's coaching with University of Michigan. He was a 4-year starter for the varsity team at Woodson and then a 4-year starter at Duke. He was the Defensive Player of the Year for high schools nationally and then for colleges nationally.
We talked about Muzio. Obviously, Dolan still carries some records in swimming on a state level and a national level, which is just outstanding, and along with being a champion in his own right. Alan Webb, after you do what Webb did in high school, I think there's no argument with having him this high on the list.
Yeah, broke a 37-year-old record The Prefontaine Classic in Oregon, Greg, and I know you were around during that time and got a chance to cover, Alan Webb, and just what a dominant high school athlete he was. And I know he went on to college, but then turned pro and brought his coach with him.
Yes, he did. And you talked about Ricky Harris before. There was a line in the Ricky Harris article, I think I read it there, about how it was never in question whether Ricky was going to finish first. It was always going to be a question on who was going to finish second. And with Webb, it was never a question whether or not he was going to finish first. That was his name is in the program. It's at the top of the list, and it's going to stay there. The question is how fast, and how embarrassing was it going to be for everybody else to get lapped by this kid. I mean, he really was, for my money, the most dominant high school athlete I've ever seen, just by the sheer, almost casual way he was able to dominate. He never really looked like he was straining out there. It was really remarkable. Mia Hamm, I mean, the argument was made by someone else in the Connection office that she was the most important player in her sport ever, and that should warrant her being number one. What say you?
I mean, what can you say about a person that is the face of her sport?
Yeah.
And I don't mean just women's soccer, I mean men's soccer too. I mean, she really is, everybody knows who Mia Hamm is. She's a household name, and she handled that with a lot of grace. And, the coaches I talked to and her past teammates that I talked to, they all agree with that. They say, she always was the humble one on the team, even though she was an incredible player. But Mia Hamm only spent a couple of years at Lake Braddock, and unfortunately, by our standards, that bumped her down a little bit. But obviously, number 4, not that bad.
Not that shabby. And Alan Johnson, anytime you name the track after somebody, he's pretty good. But let's get right to the 2 versus 1 argument. Now, there is a delightful young lady at the Connection newspapers that snaps a photograph or two named Pam Brooks, who is steadfast in her belief that Kara Lawson should be at the top of this list instead of Grant Hill. And if Pam is watching right now, BJ, please repeat what you've been saying for the last month.
Well, what I've been saying for the last month is that that was a decision that Greg made because I am physically afraid of Pam Brooks. No, Kara Lawson is the argument can be made that she could be put at the top of the list. She's currently still playing in the WNBA. Grant Hill, we all know his struggles. We all know that he is not or could be coming back. That is still to be determined. But when you think pound for pound what the two have done in their own sports, Grant Hill won 2 national titles. He helped establish a South Lakes team that still carries his name to this day as the most reverent. He is the guy you think of for basketball in this area. He's the greatest athlete to come out of this area, and I don't think there's an argument there. He was an Olympian, won 2 national titles with Coach K at Duke, and helped establish a South Lakes team that he took to the state tournament several times. So there's really, the argument can be made in what Kara Lawson has done in her sport, but I still believe pound for pound, and apples and oranges, like you say, how do you compare boys versus girls sports in that respect? I just think Hill's been more dominant on his side.
And again, I think you make an interesting point, and I think it's a point that gets muddled sometimes by people that are in this argument, which is that to say that Lawson was the best player in women's basketball at any level, it's just different than being Grant Hill and being an all-star in the NBA. It's a different concentration.
Times.
Exactly, and it's a different concentration of talent. It's not gender biased to say that Mia Hamm and Kara Lawson were bigger fish in a smaller pond.
Right.
It's just the reality of the level of those two sports at this point in time. 20 years from now, maybe the concentration of talent in those two sports is remarkably better, and maybe being the best in those sports is a different kind of deal. But right now, what Grant Hill accomplished in the NBA is more impressive than what Kara Lawson accomplished in women's basketball.
Some people might even argue that Lawson wasn't the greatest girls basketball player at the high school level to come out of this area. Katie Smirka-Duffy still holds several high school records. Now, what Smirka-Duffy has gone on, and Smirka-Duffy is number 18 on this list, what she's gone on to do is not a whole lot. She did very well in her college years and was drafted in the WNBA, but she's since succumbed to some injuries that have kept her on the sidelines. But, Lawson is still playing and doing very well with her team, but I still think, in my mind, Grant Hill's number 1.
You agree, boys?
I'm gonna have to agree with that. I mean, it hurts me because I got to write the feature on Carol Lawson. But the argument that a lot of people have been making, they say, well, she's won a title at every level that she's been at. So it's a fact that she didn't win a title with Tennessee. She was in 2 national championships, and that speaks in and of itself. It's a great accomplishment to have. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Carol Lawson, obviously an incredible player. But like you said, I think 7-time NBA All-Star person. I mean, you can't really say much.
Where do you
against that.
fall on this, Mr.
Well,
Fuller?
I'm where you guys did. I'm with Grant Hill number 1. You talked about Mia Hamm. She is the face of soccer. For a time, Grant Hill was the face of basketball. I mean, to have someone like that, someone from our area, be the face of a whole sport, that's something to something.
Something to crow about.
Something. There you go.
Well put. That's
Something
someone
to
does
bang
something.
That's something to do something
It's
about.
all apples and oranges. They're on different echelons. All right, folks, that's the list. If you want to check out the list and want to check out some just amazing, amazing sports writing, I'm going to say the best sports writing you're going to read this summer. And we're saying that as sports writers.
Well, we're competing with the Little League World Series.
Exactly. www.connectionnewspapers.com. You can find everything there. It's a really, really worthwhile project. And round of applause for the boys for doing a heck of a job. All right. Want to mention right now, as you know, it's the Fairfax Sports Network back and in full effect. The FSN Game of the Week starts up again. This is a tentative schedule. As you see, week by week, some intriguing matchups. Of course, the Oakton-Madison Geographic Grudge Fest. And you've got Herndon and Robinson, which would be an intriguing game in the sense that it's a big, big district game. And, of course, Oakton and Centerville should be a very interesting game. Oakton's on there twice. We're going to know real quick, boys, what the Cougars come back with this season after losing a bunch. But it should be great. And be sure to check out the website for complete schedule and air times. And, of course, that website would be coming up soon, I believe. But we'll see it in a second. Well, thank you, CCI Screen Printing, for all your screen printing needs. 703-978-0257. And, of course, Quality Care Ford Service Center. You service all makes and models, 703-383-6299. And Glow Pucks and 10 Cent Beer, 101 Worst Ideas in Sports History, as seen on ESPN2.
Almost done reading that, actually. I've been reading that. I always read that.
Chapter by chapter
You know,
the...
It's honestly,
Don't
just
it-
because I know you
Yeah.
and I read what you've written,
Yeah.
I can see you saying it, and
Well, that's
kills
why
me every time. I love it.
I think the audiobook is going to do really well.
I can't wait
I'm waiting
for
for
that.
my
I can't
copy.
wait for
What?
I'm waiting for my copy personally
Do
signed.
you not have the internet? Because there's this new thing that Al Gore invented that you can get books whenever you want them.
Nice. I like it. I like it.
Oh, I guess the
All right,
rock. Okay.
thank you for watching, folks. Next week, football blowout. Get ready for it because we are, and it's going to be fantastic. And in the meantime, please do be checking out the 100 greatest of all time on ConnectionNewspapers.com. Like I said, very worthwhile effort. And TJ Duckett gets you nothing, Redskin fans. It gets you another running back, and that's all that it gets you.
Whoa,
Never
enjoy
forget.
Ramsey.
Oh, shut up. You're a giant Jet fan. All right, fine. It's on again.
I'm just not gonna say anything. NFC East champions don't have to talk.
No, it's fine.
Right.
We're fine because we don't need to get into it.
Like Real Madrid.